We now have returned from recess for the Board of County Commissioners for a policy session on March 5, 2024. County Administrator Gary Schmidt, would you please proceed?
Thank you, Chair Smith. This policy session today is opioid settlement funding recommendations and recommendations for eligibility and solicitation process. Staff from Health, Housing, Human Services will present, and they are Rod Cook, Director, and Denise Swanson, Deputy Director of the Department. The Board, you previously reviewed this and asked for this information, and staff have brought it back to you today. So please go ahead, Rod and Denise.
Good morning, Commissioners. During your Board of County Commissioners meeting policy session on January 10, you instructed us to go back and formalize the criteria and process for soliciting funding proposals for community partners for the county opioid settlement funds. We're looking for two decisions today. One being how to distribute the $1.9 million that is currently in the bank, and two, criteria to be used in the notice of funding opportunity process if you approve that, us going forward with that type of process for distribution. I can go right into the
Please do, would you? Go ahead.
issues. Okay. So what we're proposing on the funding allocations are this, up to $1 million of the opioid settlement funding be allocated for community partners to apply through a competitive application process. Applications from community partners are suggested to be limited to $200,000 per application period. Applicants already receiving opioid funding settlement funds directly from the state of Oregon may also apply for county opioid settlement funding to assist in expanding substance use prevention efforts, but must demonstrate a cash match within their application. We're also recommending or requesting up to $750,000 of opioid settlement funding revenue be set aside for implementation of BCC, or Board of County Commissioners, and county priority projects, which may increase continuation of existing programming. Because you remember there's $1.5 million worth of programming already out the door that you approved way back, and most of those are like the DA, justice involved pieces, so you may want to, they may be coming back and you may want to set aside money for that. And then the last piece is up to $215,000 of opioid settlement funding revenue be allocated to HGS for HGS staff to coordinate application process, contract administration, data analysis, evaluation, and reporting. So that's the fund distribution piece. We could stop there and talk, or I could move you to the eligibility criteria, however you want to do it, Chair.
I want to make sure I heard something correctly. I wasn't sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Did you say something about a cash match?
Yes, so there are some entities or cities who received opioid funding directly from the state already.
Yes.
And so what this would do is, if you already have money that you got for opioid, if you apply to the county for additional opioid money, you have to use your money as match towards whatever effort you're trying to achieve. So in other words, a city couldn't take their opioid money and build a bridge with it and then come to the county and say, we want to use your money for opioid, but we want to use our money for some other purpose.
And so if a city or entity applies that does not have
yes, and that comes
opioid monies, there's no cash match required.
correct.
Commissioners, do you have any questions or concerns about that, Commissioner Scholl?
Question about that. Mr. Cook, if a organization, a community partner, or a nonprofit is receiving state of Oregon funds and they receive some of Clackamas County opioid settlement funds, how do you track on how the county funds are actually utilized? Wouldn't that become difficult? Wouldn't that become difficult to assess the effective use of our dollars?
You can have them itemize the budget, and you can have them report their expenditures on specifically what they're spending the dollars on. So that's how you could track exactly how they're spending the dollars. And this would only apply, remember, to cities who were qualified from the state to receive opioid dollars directly. You had to have a certain population level to be eligible for those dollars. And it's not a lot of dollars, but, and then you had some cities that, like Malala, for instance, who were too small to receive any opioid money. So we're trying to differentiate from those who have opioid money to bring to this effort and those who have nothing to bring to the effort.
And in the competitive application process, you would have some sort of criteria to ensure that the way the community partner is going to use the money is in compliance with your H3S overall goals. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay.
And that's in the next section.
Yeah, that's in the eligibility section. This is
Okay.
just how you would set, if you were trying to get approval on how you would separate the funding, the
Yeah.
1.9 million that you have in the bank, and then we'll go to the actual eligibility criteria in the next part of this presentation.
Understood. Thank you.
Rod, I think an important clarification as well is this is specifically for the current $1.9 million that we have to allocate. As you know, we'll be receiving approximately $1 to $2 million every year. So next year, we'll have money again. We can come back to you again and see how you would like to allocate those dollars.
Sure. Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, so on what you have under issue 1 in regard to the 1.9, so it says here that community partners can apply, to a limited 200,000 per application period. How long is the period?
We're seeing the application period as a 2-year period.
Okay, so my question is, $200,000. What can a community partner really do with that?
Well, it depends if I'll just use your cities as an example. Some of them are buying caseworkers to work with their law enforcement. And so on average, at least for a county position, that you need about $125,000 a year. But that's with benefits fully loaded and all that type of thing. So a city, if they have $100,000 a year, would put that towards FTE, and then they likely have to find the additional, I don't know what their costs are, but that would be an example. If you're a nonprofit, $100,000 is either going to buy FTE or it's going to buy, I think for most, 99% of this, it's going to buy people, caseworkers, those type of things. So for nonprofit, you can assume that its pricing is probably under $100,000 for a staff person to go out and do casework, outreach, whatever they're going to be doing in the program.
Okay, so community partners, define that as that's not just, that could be a nonprofit, not a city?
Absolutely nonprofits. It could be cities. It could be, I guess, even for-profit entities that are out there.
Okay. How do I heard you say cities a couple times here already, so thus far, so I'm kind of curious, how do we make sure we have, as best as possible, there's some geographic equity, right, on how these, where their dollars, so let's just say that 5 cities apply, and they're all on the west side, and at least unincorporated, maybe out of the picture, and the east side out of the picture, so to speak. Is there any thought on how to get that geographic distribution of services?
There's one piece in the eligibility criteria that we're going to talk about, and that is those cities that didn't receive any opioid funds, they would receive higher priority for these funds. And so that way you're going to see some of your rural entities that have, didn't reach the population threshold, they'll get higher points in that regard. So that should assist them to win out in that regard.
We have 2 cities that want to use this money for one caseworker, and they're going to share a caseworker. Canby and Malala.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what they want to do, right?
Yes.
And maybe they have some more, and maybe, I don't know what their idea is for, but, yeah, that's what they want to do on that one. Any other questions on issue number 1 before we go to issue number 2? And you might want to come back and think of something. Okay, can you present issue number 2, please?
Okay. The second part is the proposed criteria, and then this is how we will develop our notice of funding opportunity. This is to be the scope of work. This is kind of like your policy piece, that this is who you want to fund, and this is going to tell you how wide or how narrow the gate will be. So this first bullet is program strategy services must align and support the Clackamas County resolution setting forth the framework for the recovery-oriented system of care. And that's going to be attachment one and be a part of the procurement. So the resolution that we've passed, where we want a recovery-oriented system, they have to speak to that issue. So that's how you align them with what the board is overall wanting to see in anything we fund or
They
anything we
don't
do.
have to speak to all of the issues in there.
Absolutely not.
They can pick one.
That's right.
Or whatever.
Exactly.
Just want to make sure because that's pretty long. Thank you.
Bullet number 2, program strategy services must fill an urgent gap or critical need in addressing issues related to substance use in Clackamas County. And we'll have an attachment 2 for this. We remember the HES staff went out to the community. There's a whole list of things that this community is saying that they need, and so we want them to address those first needs. And that's going to be all the things you've been talking about for the last year in terms of what you're seeing in the streets. Law enforcement's mostly asking for caseworkers, so they have a caseworker response as opposed to a legal response on the front end of that. And then others have other services that they're trying to provide. Bullet number 3, all program strategy services must be evidence-based principles and be listed as an approved opioid abatement strategy as listed in Exhibit E. That's what came from the funders in the state, so it basically says we know these things will work, or they have some evidence-based. So evidence-based for us in our world is there's some scientific research behind it that has proven outcomes already, and so we're saying you can only use those. You can't necessarily be creating something that has no proof that it actually work. And that will keep us in alignment with our funders on that one. Program strategy services must demonstrate some level of integration of the continuum of services that include elements of prevention, treatment, recovery, and intervention with justice-involved individuals. So again, that's going to lock them into you must be addressing one of these parts of the system because the board showed that they want all these things dealt with. So. The next bullet, proposals must include evaluation metrics, such as numbers to be served, those or numbers to be impacted, target success rate data, et cetera. And so the target success rate is you have to be able to prove that this person having come through your system is better off having come through our system. So you have to have data on that at the end of the day, or we're either going to end the contract sooner, or we won't be renewing if they come back for renewal. So these are the 2 types of metrics. How many did you serve, and are the people better off for having been served? So those are the 2 things we want to measure people on in terms of our metrics. Almost done here. And this is where we get into the demographics or the geographics. Programs providing strategy services to geographic areas that have not received other opioid settlement funds will receive high priority. So you just weight that question when they say, yes, we're from a certain area that didn't receive the money. So some questions may be worth 5 points. This will be worth 10 points. It's kind of like having event status when you come into an application. It's to get you that extra bump that you need to make sure that we, now if the rest of the grant is terrible, then they still wouldn't be funded, but this helps them in that area. Then last but not least, proposals are limited to a 2-year period of funding. Itemized budget for each year is required with a county option to approve future extensions if outcomes are being met and funding allows. So this is, again, this is where you might say, no, we don't want to do 2-year, we just want 1 year, but we're suggesting sometimes it takes these things 6 months to get up and running. 2 years is a good stint for us. But again, whatever the board's pleasure is on that, we'll go with it. And the other little bit of language is just some technical stuff that we've learned from finance that we have to, if you want to be able to just renew in the future, you have to put that in the procurement that you put out at the beginning, that option is available to the board. And so that's why that last line is in there. So it gives you the option. You don't have to do it. You can say, new year, new cycle. We're going to do things all new. Now we want to do blue wagons instead of red wagons. You can shift your focus and those type of things. So those are the criteria that we put before you, and we think
Thank
we've
you.
heard you, but if we've missed anything,
So many of the items listed in your proposed criteria is based on best practices.
Yes, ma'am.
Correct? And when this whole opioid settlement lawsuit came down, I believe maybe an entity like John Hopkins was part of the conveners in stating what best practices are and what should be done with this money. And some of that is mirrored in your criteria today, correct?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure who was up first, but Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the fifth bullet here about the evaluation metrics, so on. And while I see that in the proposal, I'm wondering, and this is maybe, it can be easily viewed on a larger scale, but how we, for example, when we approved the consent agenda this morning on H3S stuff or DTD stuff or whatever department it may be, how we have more metrics before us. This has been part of the strategic plan or performing, what's it called?
Performance clackamas, managing for results.
Yeah, managing results, yeah. So my question is, will we're asking them to put that in their proposal, but is that something that is going to be monitored, the metrics themselves, and how does that rise up to our level where you can see it?
Yeah, so the report, so these are going to be on individual contracts, and we don't typically bring individual contracts up to the board. We're mostly bringing you revenue contracts where we're getting the funding source. However, you can say quarterly, we want to know how well all of these contracts are operating and functioning, so we can bring a report to you and say, and itemize them out for you, like if there's 6 of them, we can tell you how all 6 are doing, because we'll have that data, because we're asking for it on the front end. So we could absolutely do that.
Yeah, well, I'm just one person up here, suggesting that I would certainly like to see that, not just here, but in a lot of things that we do. It seems to me that, performance is really important. It also, indirectly or directly in the reports, it's always nice to know how many people are being served by this. And I know that admin costs, and you got an ask in here for essentially admin costs for, was it 215,000 or 100? Yeah, 215. So, it's always the question is how much is being absorbed by, as the people outside of government would say, red tape, and how much is actually going towards delivery of services and people being served. I would certainly always like to see that number of people being helped that are unique, not redundant, right? Not the same person being reported on 5 times or 3 times, but those unique people served.
Okay, we can do that.
Thank you. Commissioner Scholl.
Mr. Cook, Denise, we don't know for sure what will come out of the short session in Salem in terms of a modification of Measure 110. But should that happen, and should these killer drugs be recriminalized, and the governor signs off on it, I see a potential for an increased demand in in-house addiction recovery, where if somebody is arrested and has the option to do jail time or go to some in-house secure recovery facility to avoid jail. These proposed criteria, I don't suppose they need to be changed, but my question to you is, does this reflect the potential impact in the change in how we do things in the county and in a new demand on in-house addiction recovery?
If I were a nonprofit or a potential applicant to this, I'd be reading between the lines on what the legislature's doing, and if I thought there was an increased volume of people who needing treatment and someone to do that, I might write my application to reflect that.
Okay.
I will say, though, I've heard, and this is through the DA, in at least the negotiations they're doing around that particular bill, I think there's some money also coming with that change, and so the DAs and others are looking at increased capacity that they're going to need to handle the new volume of people as well. So I think there's going to be some money there, and someone proposing that through this money could be, looking at servicing that new need.
Okay, so you are looking out ahead at the potential impact on the change in Measure 110 on how we might have to do business in the county.
Yeah, and this is where we see it all part of this, the continuum. It's all, it's going to be the same folks, I think, being treated by either this part of the system, the new revamped part of the system, but it's all, we're trying to create that continuum so we have a place to send, from judicial to treatment. It's all becomes one continuum of
Okay.
service.
All right, well, thank you.
Rod, if we approve this today as presented, how soon can we get the money out to the partners?
So we would do a notice of funding opportunities, and we're working with finance, so that's a procurement process. So I have to work with finance to do that. So Gary has let us know and that we need to expedite this. And so what that means is finance and us would work diligently to get it done as soon as possible. And I'm working on it myself to assure that. So we would be writing the documents, putting the scopes together. We're already in touch with finance. We're hand in hand in this and all standing ready to get this done
So
pretty
you're ready to
quickly.
go, we just have to vote for it.
Yes, Chair.
Mr. Salas?
So with all these other, we have this, and we have all these other things like the Measure 110 changes and so forth, and I read again, I forgot the name of that document, but strategies to confront the opioid, what we worked on, and recovery support, current gaps, and so forth. So as this is shaking out right now, and we see maybe some funding coming together, what does it look like regard to the gaps? Where don't we have any light at the end of the tunnel towards addressing a particular gap? Is there anything out there that you see that we need to keep our eye on that's likely not to be addressed?
Go ahead.
Well, in House Bill, if I could interject, and so we got the $4 million for the sheriff's 23-hour stabilization center. And in the other part of the Measure 110 bill, there is $2 million that we could be getting. It's basically 10% of a $20 million that the legislature is assigning for additional FTE at the county, and that could be 3 to 4 additional FTE in the DA's office and H3S, as it was explained to me. Now, if there's any other additional monies on this area from the legislation, Paul, I'm not sure.
And that's one-time money, right? The $2
Well,
million?
I don't know. If it's one time, I think it's yearly, but I'm not sure. Gary, do you know?
Don't know yet.
See, we don't know. And then also, in the governor's housing bill that was passed, that the legislature pared back, we will probably get something on that too, but we don't know that either.
Yeah.
So,
I'm just looking, I appreciate that. And to that question is, what is it that's not coming together anywhere thus far? There's no opportunities where, again, it's a gap, but there's no means to get there.
So in the report that we put together after our community engagement process, we have within there listing of gaps under linkage to treatment, evidence-based treatment, recovery support. So there are identified by our community partners and our staff gaps that we could be looking at and utilizing within the criteria when we're doing funding, when the NOFO goes out, to say we're going to look at the gaps as one of the pieces that we look at and fund those first.
Okay, so I'll just reframe my question. I appreciate that. I'll just word it a little bit differently. As things are coming together, we're approving this. Those, what you just listed, are still not likely to see any funding or opportunities for gap filling, or these are?
They are. They're eligible for, they would be things we'd hope applications would come in to address.
Okay, so
Yes.
what is not being, what gaps do we know of that is not likely to be addressed?
Well, this is probably not popular, but I don't think you will ever have enough treatment services available, but this board has worked really hard to put treatment in that other counties probably won't have. So you're already working on all the different centers that you're promoting. We're putting things in place. So we'll have something, but will we have enough for everybody? I don't know. This new law will bring some people back into the system that we haven't seen in a year. And so I think the volume's going to be up, so we're always going to say we need more. But I think for overall there's never been enough prevention services ever, because prevention, you're not bleeding, and legislature and everybody else kind of sees what we call the bleeders. And so the treatment part of the system sees more. However, people need treatment and they need it now, and that's what we've been talking about for the last year. So I think this board is really creating a continuum that you're not seeing in other places. So we'll have something along the whole continuum, and then I'll be back to you next year saying, we need 2 of those, or we need 3 of those, or when we start getting better at this, we'll put some in the rural areas and some in the urban, so we'll enhance it as the dollars flow, or we get better and more efficient at what we do.
I appreciate that reply, and I'm just replaying back what I heard in some of the hearings in Salem during this whole conversation about the 110 reforms and changes. And, whether it's comments that were made by people that were testifying or people made that were on the committee that were legislators. But one that resonated with me is that the recognition that we don't have the infrastructure in place for recovery centers and so forth. We have these huge gaps. And granted, I know what we're doing here in the county. And my question back to the chair, is it one-time funding, is it ongoing? It could be oversubscribed, and we know it will be, right? We know that there's not enough money to do this, but is there, getting back to the marijuana money, the original intent of the marijuana money to go towards treatment, I'm curious, I'm not asking you to respond to this, but my questions really, or concern is along the lines of what does it take? Is there any state efforts and commitment that this will be addressed or funded, and growing the infrastructure, people included, right? You can't just build buildings, you need the people to do it. Are we growing that infrastructure to provide those services? Or is that really going to be more on a county-by-county basis and done more individually with the resources that we have?
Well, I could comment. I think your points are well taken. I think every county is going to look different depending on where they're at in the continuum. Now, during the negotiations, Marion and Clackamas counties were singled out because, for instance, we already have LEADS program. We already have all these other programs that the legislature would like to see. What I am more concerned about is the strings attached to this 135-page bill that nobody has really had time to digest or analyze. Is this, again, going to be a partially funded mandate where we find ourselves backfilling with opioid dollars because the legislature has demanded that we do X, and then we find out that the dollars that they've assigned us won't do X? That is, and that's why when Commissioner Schrader and I were in negotiations and we called special ops, we wrote our own statement, subject to funding. We would do this subject to the state funding because yes, infrastructure is a big deal. An unfunded mandate is a big deal. And what I tell people is, yes, this bill isn't perfect, but I suspect it'll be very imperfect. But we will have an opportunity in the 2025 session to go back and see what's working in the counties and what's not working in the counties. Some counties might opt out. There's a provision in the bill by September 1st you could opt out. I doubt if we will, but there are counties that could do that. So, and only 23 counties really agreed that they would do this because they just don't have providers, infrastructure, or any services at all in their counties to do this. So it's going to be very interesting how all this rolls out. To further your conversation, Commissioner Savas.
Yep.
Any other comments, Commissioner Schultz?
Yes, thank you. I have just one comment. In 2022, the federal government did a survey called the Addiction and Health Survey in Oregon that found that of the people polled, 12.6% had used an illicit drug in the previous 30 days. Now, 12.6%, if that's the case for the entire state, 12.6% of 4.3 million is 541,000 people. And Clackamas County has 10% of the state population. So does that mean that potentially 54,000 people in Clackamas County had used an illicit drug in the previous 30 days? Now, I mentioned this to you. only because even if Measure 110, if it was repealed tomorrow, and the visible part of addiction and opioid abuse on our streets was removed, when those people go to jail or recovery, we would still have a serious, and I think our mental health people in the county would probably bear me out on this, we would still have a serious problem with the abuse of opioids by people. Some might even be in this room who appear functional, but are on the road to because these opioids are so addictive, to being on the street themselves. So I mentioned that to you, Mr. Cook and Denise, because that's something else we need to look at. What is our ability to reach out to those people who are affected by these opioids, but don't have a problem bad enough to come into our realm of detection? Okay?
Yeah.
And so that might not be part of your proposed criteria, but I just mentioned it to you as something that I see as a very serious problem. And let me add, how many people are out there who have a problem and need help and it's not bad enough for them to come to one of our clinics and ask for help, okay?
Yeah.
So,
And I'd say that that's great insight, and part of why we were asking money for our internal staff is because that is the work they're doing.
Yeah.
Where they're talking to doctors about overprescribing. You know, there's trainings for doctors at the very beginning of this. I have some friends who they're professionals, and they went in for back pain, got on opioid, and when they got addicted to it, they had to go to, when the doctor says no at some point, they go to the street and they get the harder stuff. And so we've seen some really good people get caught up in this opioid thing. And so you're absolutely right. And that's that systems work we do behind the scenes, training doctors, talk about not overprescribing, getting individuals who go in. When I get offered opioids now, I really consider, do I really need it or not? And give me an aspirin instead of this, because I'm scared of what might happen to me. So you're right on, and that's the other way. So short answer is yes. That's what our staff are doing. That's their expertise, and they're working those systems throughout. So I think we have that covered. We're not asking nonprofits to do that for us, but I think our staff are doing that piece.
okay. All right, well, thank you very much.
Commissioners, I will entertain a motion as in our recommendation on page 2.
I move to approve the opioid settlement funding recommendations for eligibility and solicitation process as presented today.
Commissioner Shaw moves we approve the opioid settlement framework as presented today in option 1, and Commissioner Schrader has seconded the motion. Further discussions?
I'd just like to say, I know it's difficult for many of our personnel and our nonprofits and other partners. This is a difficult work, and I encourage everybody, don't give up, because we have to have an attitude in the county that this opioid addiction problem is not going to be our future. That we can in fact get a rope around this. We can in fact solve this problem, not just here in the county, but working with our state legislators and our representatives to the United States Congress. Don't give up.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's just get this money out the door so we can do some good work. All right. Seeing no further comments, Tony, please take the poll.
Commissioner Savas.
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader.
Aye.
Commissioner Schull.
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 4-0. Thank you, staff, for coming forward and presenting this today.
Thank you, Board.
You bet. Gary, anything else?
That's all for today.
Seeing no further business before this commission, we are adjourned.